Santa may have not brought you exactly what you wanted on Christmas Day, but don't worry because I've got 8 players that are set to go absolutely nuclear in championship week of the 2024 fantasy football season. These are your players with a ton of upside, fantastic matchups, and my must start players going into championship weekend. All right, we're kicking the video off with Bucky Irving of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers getting a smash matchup against the Carolina Panthers, allowing the 32nd most fantasy points to opposing running backs, and coming off of another great game in Week 16 against the Dallas Cowboys, where he had 18.2 fantasy points, 68 yards on the ground, a touchdown, and 3 receptions for 24 receiving yards. Bucky Irving has been on absolute fire. Pretty sure he's been in the must-start video for like, I don't know, 10 videos straight or something. But ultimately, since week 6 of the season, he is double digits in every game except for 2. And in one of those games, he had to exit early due to injury. Week 15 wasn't a ton of upside, but he had 117 yards on the ground and 7.8 yards per carry, coming off of another great game against the Cowboys this past week, where his opportunities were a bit limited because the Buccaneers found themselves in a game script where they needed to throw the ball. But ultimately, this is a smash matchup against the Panthers. We've been starting running backs against this Panthers defense all season long, and this is now a must-win game for the Buccaneers as they are currently out of the playoffs, and the Falcons have overtaken them in the top of the NFC South. So you know the Bucs are going to come out here at home and do whatever they can to beat the Panthers. And don't forget, in Week 13, on the road against the Panthers, Bucky Irving had 27.5 fantasy points, his best fantasy day of the entire season. If you own Bucky Irving, don't overthink this one. He is a must-start player in Week 17. He's your buddy, the elf. You have to have him in your lineup going into championship week. Next up, I'm going to talk about Tyjae Spears of the Tennessee Titans. He's a little Kevin in Home Alone. He's a little sneaky this week, but he's going to bring you a ton of Christmas joy, coming off of 2 straight games with 2 touchdowns, 27.2 fantasy points in Week 15, 21.6 fantasy points last week in Week 16 against the Colts, with Tony Pollard active in both of those games. And here in Week 17 gets an incredible matchup against the Jacksonville Jaguars, giving up the 31st most fantasy points to opposing running backs. So I still think Pollard will get some touches here, still be part of this game plan. But, you know, like I said, in Week 15, Pollard had 17 touches and a touchdown, and Tyjae Spears still came through with 27.2 fantasy points. So he's going to be a top waiver addition in this past week's waiver period. He's currently, at the time of recording this, sitting at 57% rostered, but I expect that to change. And he's going to be one of these players who you're going to have a tough decision. Do I start him? Who am I benching over him? All that stuff. But ultimately, I think at the end of the day, he's going to be a very good start overall. So as always, depends on who you have to bench for him, but I really think that Tyjae Spears is a player that you can flex this week, that you can get into your lineup and feel very good about. He is a player with a ton of upside due to this matchup and due to what he's done over the past 2 weeks on the season, even with a healthy Tony Pollard. So if you got Tyjae Spears, fire him up. He has a chance to go absolutely nuclear in Week 17. And last running back I want to talk about is Zach Charbonnet of the Seattle Seahawks. Now, we have to kind of evaluate 2 things here. Is Kenneth Walker going to play or not going to play? And is this elbow injury to Zach Charbonnet going to bother him in any way? But I really think in a good way that Zach Charbonnet could be your Grinch who stole Christmas from Kenneth Walker here in Week 17 and come through with a massive fantasy performance. But I only have that confidence in Charbonnet if Kenneth Walker does not play. We look at weeks 14 and 15 with no Kenneth Walker. 38.3 fantasy points in week 14 for Charbonnet, 13.6 in week 15 for Charbonnet, with 3 touchdowns in that stretch. And the Bears now come in 30th against opposing running backs. It's a smash spot. I know it's Thursday night football. I try to avoid Thursday night games, all that stuff. But this Bears run defense has been absolutely atrocious as of late. So if we get word that Walker's not playing, which by the time this video comes out, got to record everything early this week because of the holiday, but by the time this video comes out, you might already know that Walker is out. And if that's the case, Zach Charbonnet is going to be an absolute must-start running back going into championship week. Let's move along to a couple of wide receivers here, and I'm going to start with Terry McLaurin himself. Coming off of another great fantasy performance in a tough matchup against the Eagles, he still came through with 17 fantasy points, 6 targets, 5 receptions, 60 receiving yards, and a touchdown. He now has a touchdown in each of his last 4 games and 6 total touchdowns in his last 4 games in total. And Terry is looking like Clark Griswold in Christmas Vacation. You just can't beat him. He is the epitome of Christmas joy, the way he has been playing as of late. And now he's getting this Falcons secondary that's giving up the 28th most fantasy points to opposing wide receivers on Sunday Night Football in a primetime game, in a very meaningful game for both of these teams in terms of playoff implications. Terry McLaurin's your wide receiver 4 on the season so far, but I still get a lot of questions about Terry McLaurin, and maybe that was due to last week's matchup, but I've also gotten questions heading into Week 17. There's no way you can bench Terry McLaurin going into championship week. He is the definition of a must-start player here in Week 17. And I'm headed straight to Underdog to take the over on Terry McLaurin's total receiving yards, currently sitting at 63.5 receiving yards. He has hit that line in 3 out of his last 4 matchups, and I don't see why he would not hit it in a primetime game in a great matchup against this Falcons secondary. So I'm headed straight to Underdog to take the over on Terry McLaurin's receiving yards. Don't forget, all new users who sign up on Underdog are getting a free NFL Pick Em to use towards Week 17's action. Take that free Pick Em, pair it with McLaurin's total receiving yards. Once both of those lines hit, you'll automatically triple your cash entry. And on top of that, as long as you guys sign up using promo code TheCatch on Underdog, that link is down below, you're also going to receive a 50% deposit match up to $1,000. Let's take a look at Adam Thielen coming off of another solid performance with 15.3 fantasy points against the Arizona Cardinals. 6 targets, 5 grabs, 43 receiving yards, a touchdown. And now, since he's returned from injury outside of that initial game against the Chiefs, he has had double digits in his last 4 games, and he's been very good overall. Don't forget, the last time Adam Thielen played the Buccaneers, he had 23.9 fantasy points, 10 targets, 8 grabs, 99 receiving yards, a touchdown, and should have had a second touchdown that was ruled out of bounds, and it was not out of bounds. So he had a monster game the last time he played the Bucs, and here he is again playing the Buccaneers and the Panthers. One of these teams, they're going to come out here, try to spoil a divisional opponent on Christmas weekend, try and help knock the Bucs out of the playoffs potentially. Then they play the Falcons in Week 18, so they have a very interesting schedule. So this is going to be a competitive game script, and this is a must-win game for the Buccaneers. So we're going to see plenty of offense. You got Adam Thielen coming in as Frosty the Snowman. You can't stop him. Nothing can hold Frosty back on Christmas weekend. That may have been my worst one in the video yet, but nonetheless, Adam Thielen is a must-start player. I love him as a flex option this week. Absolutely torched the Bucs the last time he played them. The game script is there. The matchup is there. He's one of my favorite flex options going into championship weekend. Last wide receiver I want to talk about, I'm actually a little bit surprised, is Tyreek Hill of the Miami Dolphins, coming off of not a great game, 11.9 fantasy points, 7 targets, 3 grabs, a touchdown, 29 receiving yards. Should have had at least one more touchdown in this game, was dropping some balls, and ultimately, Hill is still back in that like every week start category for most of you, but I've already got a lot of questions on Hill going into the week. And initially going into the week, I wasn't that high on Tyreek Hill. I downgraded him to a flex option in the start sit video. But ultimately, I think Tyreek Hill is set for a big day as the Browns secondary has moved back to allowing the 31st most fantasy points to opposing wide receivers. Don't know if Waddle's going to play or not. Don't know if that really matters. The volume should still be there for Hill. And ultimately, it's been a frustrating year to own Tyreek Hill, but since week 5 of the season, he's only given you single digits 3 times. And in his last 4 games, he has 20 or more fantasy points in 2 of those games and 3 touchdowns in his last 4 games, as well as a touchdown in every game except for 2 since week 10 of the season. So Hill has still been solid for the most part, and this is a fantastic matchup and a must-win game for the Dolphins. They cannot lose another game if they want to stay in the playoff race. Love the matchup here. I'm feeling like Tyreek Hill is Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer. You're kind of doubting him. Everybody's pointing at him saying, I don't know about this guy, but he's going to guide you through Christmas weekend and help get you guys that championship here in week 17. Okay, quick look at a quarterback and tight end, and you already know that I'm a believer going into championship season, and I don't like to pat myself on the back too much, but I just want to remind you guys that we were in on Bo Nix very early on the season, dating back to week 6 and 8 of the season. We declared it Bo Nix season in week 9, and he had 18 fantasy points. It wasn't as good as we expected against the Ravens, but ultimately since then, he's been fantastic. He's your quarterback 9 on the season so far. It's been a little bit up and down the past 5 weeks. 28 points, 19 points, 14 points, 16 points, but 21 points this past week. Very solid against the Chargers, 29-40, 263 passing yards, 2 passing touchdowns, 25 yards on the ground. The turnover bug that he had in weeks 13 and 15 seems to be gone, and this is a smash matchup against the Cincinnati Bengals on Saturday, giving up the 27th most fantasy points to opposing quarterbacks. And on top of this, once again, we're looking for these game scripts. This is a great game script, a very meaningful game for both teams involved. Playoff implications for both the Bengals and the Broncos. The Bengals cannot lose this game. They have to win to stay in the playoff hunt. The Broncos can technically win, but their playoff chances decrease quite a bit if they lose this game. This is a very important game on the road for the Broncos, so everything's there. The matchup, the game script. Bo Nix has been great on the season, was great this past week. Not only is he a must-start quarterback going into championship weekend if you own him, but I'm going to say Bo Nix is Santa Claus himself. He is bringing all the Christmas cheer to your fantasy lineup. He's bringing your presents. He's bringing everything you need on Christmas weekend. If you own Bo Nix, don't you dare bench him right after Christmas. He is literally Santa Claus. And last but not least, let's take a look at Jonnu Smith, who made last week's video. And I get so many questions about Jonnu Smith. And yes, he still came through in week 16, 12.2 fantasy points, 6 targets, 6 grabs, 62 receiving yards, 12 or more fantasy points in every game since week 11. In that same stretch, he has 5 receiving touchdowns. He's been on absolute fire, and he gets a fantastic matchup this weekend. One of the best matchups he's had in weeks against the Browns, allowing the 25th most fantasy points to opposing tight ends. And I think the issue with Jonnu Smith is that so many people got him off the waiver wire, that they have other, valuable tight ends on their roster as well. But I've said it for weeks. Jonnu Smith is a flex option. He's a player that you can always start at tight end, depending on who you have, but he's also a player that you can always get into your lineup, even if you have to flex him. He has been that good on the season. He's your tight end 3 on the fantasy season, averaging 12.8 fantasy points per game. Very safe floor going into the week, but I think he has a lot of upside due to the matchup as well. And once again, this is a must-win game for the Dolphins, as we discussed earlier. So if you have Jonnu Smith, don't be afraid to start him. It's your Ralphie. He's your true Christmas story. Everybody's kind of looking at him sideways, but he's got nothing but Christmas cheer here on Christmas weekend. You have to have Jonnu Smith in your starting lineup. That'll do it for today's video. There are your must-start players going into championship weekend here in week 17. As always, guys, I'm answering as many fantasy football questions in the comment section down below. So if you guys need anything whatsoever, be sure to drop me a comment. I'll get back to as many of you guys as I possibly can. But most importantly, make sure that you guys are subscribed to the channel so that you don't miss out on any of the content. So we're going to have everything that you guys need to help bring home that championship here in the 2024 fantasy football season. So with that, I'll say Merry Christmas to each and every one of you. And thank you guys so much for being such an incredible community and for everything that you guys have done to help contribute to such an incredible season here on the Catch Fantasy Football. I truly appreciate each and every one of you guys, and I hope all of you guys had a fantastic holiday, as well as a fantastic holiday to all of your families. With that, I'll say thank you guys so much for watching and or listening, and remember, you saw it here on the Catch.